Hello, this is John Rankin, host of the BibleandPolitics.org, broadcasting here at Simsbury Community Television. This is episode number 3, and the goal in this series is to look at the Bible and politics from a couple angles. The first angle is a proposal I have on the table in my book, The 6 Pillars of Honest Politics, on how to cut Connecticut law, as was written in 2006, from 17,000 pages down to 36 pages. And likewise, federal law from 48,000 pages down to 24. When I share this with people, they go, really? And I go, yes, I have published it. I'm just trying to get rid of all the crud. And so we're going to talk about that as one track. The other track, or just any issue where the Bible and politics cross-fertilizes. And for many people, the word, as social gatherings, you can talk about anything except for religion and politics, because that's where people's passions come to the fore and conflict can happen. But I've been doing this 40 years and really almost conflict-free, because my goal is not to push my opinion on someone else, it's to listen to someone else's opinion in questions of theology and politics, no matter what their angle is, and I love the widest variety of opinion there is. And I argue this is the nature of the Bible itself in Genesis, a level playing field for all ideas to be heard equally, and this is fulfilled in the life and ministry of Jesus as well. And so bringing this in the political world, it means a level playing field, and that's what I'm seeking to do here. So today, let me introduce to you our 3 guests. First of all, my colleague, Mark Anderson, who heads up, you head up the Connecticut Republican Assembly. He can talk about that. Then Harold Harris is the spokesperson, communications director for the Libertarian Party of Connecticut. And then Peter Wolfgang is director or president.
Both.
He's a head honcho, okay? So, and he is director and president of the Family Institute of Connecticut. And I am John Rankin, president of the Theological Education Institute International, TEII.org. It sounds impressive, it's modest, but it has a large vision. So what I've done in my book, The 6 Pillars of Honest Politics, is I have, as I said earlier, cut the length of Connecticut law and the Constitution to simplicity. Each of my colleagues here today have looked at this, and so I'm going to turn it over at this point to Mark, simply to begin the conversation, and the goal here is an open-ended conversation between us, and who knows where we'll wind up. Mark?
Well, I think my approach is realism,
Okay.
which change really normally, short of a war, happens incrementally. I agree totally with your revision, but in real life, like you take zero-based budgeting, the federal government was an ideal, but it never happens. Everything happens incrementally. One little battle at a time. Something wholesale would take a revolution. So that's where I'm coming from. We got to be happy with one battle at a time, small victories.
So that's a strategic question.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So, along the same lines, I mean, the Libertarian Party, every year we run candidates, and sure, we'd like to win the election, but the fact that we get enough votes that next year we can run again without partitioning is one of our goals, so we can incrementally increase the population's awareness to our party and our beliefs, which basically what we support individuals' rights to make choices on their own without the government intervention. And if you looked at our platform online, you'd see that it's pretty much based on that basic nugget that people are free to make their own decisions and make their own mistakes.
So in making their own mistakes, what is the boundary that protects everyone else from someone's mistakes?
Well, the primary boundary would be that we believe you can make your own mistakes as long as they don't hurt somebody else.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So that's where the government comes in, is to enforce laws that where you would hurt somebody else. Like you can't murder somebody, you can't physically abuse somebody. But when it comes to a lot of social issues, the government goes too far, we feel, and that those should be up to the person's own personal morality as to how they address those moral issues.
And so Peter has a slightly different opinion at that one point, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's running up the white flag and just surrendering, because these things don't happen in a vacuum, John. I mean, there is a very vigorous, well-funded, very active cultural left movement in this country that has largely taken over our politics and our courts. And, you know, a lot of the bad developments of the last 50 years that you and I would both oppose, these are not things that just sort of happened like a hurricane. These are things that were actually imposed from above. So to say that the left, you know, the pro-abortion or whoever, they can take over our courts, our government, and continue to push their revolution, but we can't push back because that would be interfering in people's lives. To me, it's unilateral disarmament, it's surrender.
Well, you've given us a lot of good fodder to talk about. And let me just make one observation from my perspective. For me, first the gospel in politics. And I've, you know, for 40 years been doing my rigorous work on this. And in my old age here, I'm moving toward completion of my PhD in Hebrew covenant and political freedom. And when it comes to language, left and right I find as polarizing. Sometimes Republican versus Democrat can be that way, and so can a conservative liberal. And so I eschew that language as much as I can. Most of those points of language I can like in a given context, depending what they're referring to. So that's why when I call myself biblical, I'll let people ask me what does that mean, because there's a lot of misunderstanding. Or pro-life libertarian, I can take the pro-life libertarian language that I assign myself and argue that from the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and property. So this comes back, Harold, to a question for you, and then Peter, I'd like your input here. Is I would say, because I think I can pull this together somewhat. We're about to see if A, I'm right, or B, I'm wrong, okay? And this is an incremental perspective, Mark. Is what we have at the federal government in the 5th and 14th Amendments as legally codified is no one may be deprived of life, liberty, or property apart from due process of law, okay? So Harold, here's a question for you. If a person's personal morality in private were to injure another person, would that fall under the purview of the government?
Their personal...
In their private actions, if they were to injure the life, liberty, or property, or assault the life, liberty, or property of another, would that fall under the purview of where you think the government should protect?
Well, if it's definitely going to hurt someone else, then that would be a restriction. I'm not quite sure what that would be, but you know, you didn't give an example, but the basic premise is that if you're harming someone else, then there's a limit that the government can step in and adjudicate that harm.
I think there's two big examples. The one example would be pro-life. Peter, I'll let you give your perspective on that one.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. I should clarify too, when you asked me, are you director or president, I said both. Family Institute of Connecticut has 3 legally separate entities. I am the executive director of the main entity, the 501c3. I am the president of Family Institute of Connecticut Action, which is a C4, and it's through that entity that we lobby.
And for our audience, do you want to tell them what a C4 is?
Yes, well, a C4 is a social welfare organization. So for instance, a C3 is nonprofit, it's charitable. Most of what we do is just educational.
And you can give tax-deductible receipts.
That's right. That's right. All this information is on our website, ctfamily.org. The second organization, Family Institute of Connecticut Action, is a social welfare organization. Donations to it are not tax deductible, and that allows us to use all the funding for that to lobby up at the state capitol, which we've been very involved in. And then there is a third entity, Family Institute of Connecticut Action Committee, which is a political action committee like Mark's group. You know, we're interested in running candidates for office or supporting candidates.
Yeah.
So
according to the IRS, you operate in the 3 domains to accomplish a single goal.
yes.
Okay.
More or less.
Okay. So back to the issue. The reason I bring you in here, Peter, is that when it comes to libertarian, okay, and why I put pro-life libertarian in front of me, is because the debate is over the humanity of the unborn. Is this a person? If it's a person,
Yep.
yeah. Peter?
I don't see any conflict between social conservatism, which I do embrace that phrase. I do think it's descriptive. People understand what you mean when you use it. I don't see any conflict between social conservatism and pro-life libertarianism.
What I'd like to say is that under the libertarian platform, each individual has their own belief structure. You can believe what you want to believe as an individual. It's just whether you're going to force your beliefs onto someone else. That's where we draw the line. So I personally am pro-life, but I'm not going to force my view on someone else. Okay, and that's and part of the reason, like in the case of pro-life, it's like the definition of when is it life, okay? And I personally believe it's at conception, but my belief doesn't match other people's beliefs, and I shouldn't be forcing my belief structure on them. That's where my difference is, and their moral compass. I should be able to talk to them and explain to them that I think that there is a better way to handle an abortion rather than abortion. However, it would be talking to them and convincing them to change their mind. I'm not going to force them to change their mind.
So my frustration with that, and this was our conflict just this year with Mark Bowden, the mayor of Danbury, who was one of the 5 candidates. He was the endorsed candidate for governor of the Republican Party, and then he was one of 5 in the primary, and he lost the nomination to run for governor. The language that Harold is using is very close to the language that Mark Bowden used, who also describes himself as pro-life. It's a story at least as old as Mario Cuomo in a famous speech, or infamous speech, that Mario Cuomo gave at Notre Dame in 1984. My frustration is this. The abortion issue as we understand it today in terms of what it means for politics and the law is at least 45 years old. And the conflict is between these two groups that self-identify as pro-life and pro-choice. And everyone knows, except until Cuomo came along, everyone knows what these two phrases mean. When you say you're pro-life, you're not just saying that you believe that the child ought not to be killed. You're saying that the law ought to protect the right to life of the child not to be killed, which is what I think I understand pro-life libertarians, although not Harold, if I understand him correctly, to also be saying. Pro-choice.
I will re-examine some of the language of that.
Okay.
But I do believe the unborn and the woman, who is the one who's being abandoned by chauvinistic men in most abortion decisions, okay?
Sure.
The woman and the unborn are equal human beings, need to be protected fully.
And I cut my baby teeth in this movement on feminists with Feminists for Life, so I'm in complete agreement with you about that.
Do you know my postgrad degree at Harvard, what it was in?
No.
Feminist ethics.
Okay, I think
So I, as an evangelical pro-life minister, I was at the epicenter of the national feminist movement.
Yes.
And the reason being was I want to make sure that I'm always accountable to those who think differently. But go ahead.
So pro-life, that's what pro-life means. It doesn't just mean, gee, you think the child ought not to be killed. It's a statement about what you think the law ought to say regarding the unborn child, that every unborn child ought to be protected in law and welcomed in life. The pro-choice position is that it's up to the individual. The pro-choice position actually is a libertarian position in the sense that most pro-choice people, although this is changing in more recent years, but historically over the last 45 years, pro-choicers will say, I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice. What that means is I may or may not believe that the child should not be killed, but I would never interfere with someone else's right.
And then see, okay.
And so to me, what Harold is saying, even though he says, I'm personally pro-life, functionally what he's saying is he's pro-choice.
Okay, well, I don't agree with you, because Harold and I have talked before the show, okay? And I want to try to bridge a gap a little bit. Part of what we're talking about, in my estimation, is in philosophy what is called the meta-ethics of language. It's not so much important that we understand what we mean by what we say, but what do our hearers understand? When we choose language that sets up pro-life versus pro-choice, I've never been pleased with that. And I'll tell you why. I was testifying before the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights in 1985. The American Baptist churches was considering removing their membership, and they did remove their membership. But the question that I asked the two national heads who came up to Hartford of the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights is, I said, how can we define choice unless we first define life? You can't choose unless you're first alive.
Yep.
And so that was my observation, upon which I've done a lot of other theological work. And therefore my conclusion, and this is that was 85, but my conclusion from 2 years before was that I am pro-informed choice. And you can't have an informed choice unless you are going to define what is human life and what is not historically, which Roe v. Wade punted on. The Roe v. Wade decision is, I think, the weakest Supreme Court decision in history for one simple reason. And you're a lawyer, Peter, so you know this. You cannot adjudicate, whether by jury or judge, a case unless you agree on the central facts of the case. And they punted. They said, we don't know when life begins. I won't go into details of that. And what I'm saying is, no, they should have then returned it to the appellate courts, or they should have ruled on behalf of the unborn. However, the problem is, what drives the abortion decision overwhelmingly is men who won't be responsible to the woman whom they've made pregnant in one capacity or another. Okay, putting that aside, let me share with you language I presented to the chairman of Republicans for Choice in 1996, Ann Stone, and she went by the name chairman, okay? And so she was Republicans for Choice, and I gave her the language, which I have here, bottom of page 1 of my rewrite. Under section 1.1, it says, all people are made in God's image and are to be protected by due process of law for the entire natural duration of their lives. Now, she agreed with me on that, even though she was, quote, pro-choice. Now, do you know why she agreed? Because what I did there is exactly what Harold is concerned about. I'm not imposing something. Okay? I think Roe v. Wade has imposed itself, but I'm not going to answer with a reimposition. You have to have the persuasion. You have to have the level playing field. So what I've done here is I've said, for the entire natural duration of their lives, let's have the debate.
Yep.
The debate has never happened. I have no doubt that if the debate were fair, the debate would show the full humanity of the woman, the full humanity of the unborn, and they are equal. Okay? So, Mark.
So I think in this state, there almost is no debate. I've heard many self-described moderate Republicans say, I'm pro-life, but Roe versus Wade is the law of the land, so I got to comply with the law. And they might give in on parental notification before abortion, but we see a likelihood of President Trump getting another Supreme Court justice who could be the deciding vote in overturning Roe versus Wade. And then the debate, I think, is going to heat up in this state. Everyone's going to have to take a stand. I know there's a state law that protects abortion, but not the Constitution, right? It's not in the Constitution.
Okay, Mark, what you've said and what Peter said, I want to bring back to Harold.
Okay.
Harold said we have to be persuasive.
Right.
How does that language, or this language, aid our persuasiveness, Harold?
Okay, well, the way I mean persuasive, I'm not sure how to connect it, but being persuasive to people is when you explain to them what the fact, like one thing is I know know someone that had twins that were born at 22 weeks. And they had problems, but they survived. So if you try to figure out where to draw a line, that to me would be at 20 weeks would be the proven line, that there are people that have been born right around that time and have survived and prospered. And
So you would
argue,
support making abortion illegal after 20 weeks?
I don't support making anything illegal in this regard because I think it's up to the individual. I'm not God. I don't make the judgment call, okay? That person has to take responsibility for their actions in the face of God if they believe in a God. But it's not my position to impose what I believe is God's will on them.
Yeah, but we're not talking about imposition. We're talking about due process of law. So, for example, if the people were to vote that life begins at conception, would that be satisfactory to you? if there were a true plebiscite nationally.
That,
If you went through the due process of law and had a
Yeah.
constitutional amendment that declared
Yeah.
that the unborn child from conception is a full human being under the 14th Amendment, would that be satisfactory to you?
for my personal views would, but I'm not sure that I could speak for all libertarians because I'm saying that that's...
No, I'm just asking
Yeah.
you because, well, so for example, I've hosted in several forums, and I'll do it on this show as well, Nadine Strawson,
Yeah.
the former president of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. She, like Alan Dershowitz, who I debated once on the Mapplethorpe debate back in 1990 in Boston when I was still up there, they are true civil libertarians. And they both bemoan what the ACLU has become, okay, politically in their mind. And Nadine, the first time she and I brushed this issue, because it never was a focus of our several forums, she said, John, if you can show me, according to the 14th Amendment, that the unborn is a person, I will agree with you, okay? And so what I'm asking at this point is really, and I know that we'll end up being on the same page, because a libertarian, by definition, wants liberty for people's ideas to be heard.
Right.
Okay, and so to me, if we make sure that everyone is heard and there is a due process of law, which is amending the Constitution, which is a very high threshold, you know.
And he's asking that question with the understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, what you think, Harold, with the understanding that you don't
Yeah.
necessarily speak for your whole party on this.
Correct.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
but I want to try to bring the party's perspective
Yes,
as well.
yes, please.
Okay, because like I said, the party believes certain things, but the individuals in the party don't have to believe those things to be. Because
Part
what
of
we
the party.
believe basically is
Like
that you shouldn't be
Unitarians.
imposing. You shouldn't be imposing
That was
your
before
will.
we were taping.
You shouldn't be imposing your will on others. So, but so I'll give you go back to the example where I was talking about persuasion is the fact that right now we have in this battle that's going on, you'll have people that are opposed to having discussions about the problems with abortion. You know, you'll have, like in Hartford, I'm not sure what the current status is, but there was a clinic one to set up across the street from an abortion place. And so because they wanted to show that there's options, and the mayor and others stop that from happening through zoning, or at least they tried to stop it from happening from zoning and regulations and stuff like that. And what I say is that's wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. And the Libertarian Party would say the same thing. And because what you want to have is the opportunity to discuss the problem and let the people, the individual, make an informed decision. Am I doing the right thing? And so if the law is leaning to one side and preventing through zoning and other regulations the inability of people to express the opposing view, then that's a problem. And the same thing is on the other end is if they're being told that they can't do something just because somebody's belief structure says they can't do it, then that's a problem too. You want to be free to make your own decision.
See, the definition of terms is crucial because what happens is, if you go back to the American Medical Association in the 1850s, when they formed, and following, their argument against abortion was based on the humanity of the unborn. When you come to 1973 before, in 1973, then the humanity of the unborn, which had been affirmed, was not even given place of argumentation.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems that the person who really disagrees with me on the nature of abortion, if they are a believer in the rule of law, would want to have that debate. And so what happens is, that's why I know that, so I've read the whole Libertarian Party thing you have online, and I agree with everything that's there, just that one clause of a person could do with their body what they wish, and then I add the caveat there. Well, is it their body, and does it do harm? And so for me, so the chairman of Republicans for Choice, I've met with her in the meantime, very pleasant woman, Ann Stone. Her ex-husband's more famous, but anyhow. So when I said this language here about to be protected by due process of law for the entire natural duration of their lives, Good, John, I'll debate you. See, that's what I'm aiming for because, and Peter, I'll get your thoughts on this, because I believe that if any of us advocate something that's true, then we're low-key in our anxiety about it. We may be insistent in our energies devoted, but low-key in our anxiety, and we want to have the debate happen, and therefore we want to go out of our way to listen to others. And if they don't want to be listened to, well, that's their choice. We move forward in our positive agenda. So how does that language land with you, Peter?
The language of
where I would reckon a Connecticut law that all people are made in God's image
sure.
and are to be protected by due process of law for the entire natural duration of their lives, and then we debate what that natural duration is.
So, 2 or 3 things. I'm in complete agreement with that language. I think Mark's point is significant. I want to come back to it that he made earlier to the effect, and I could fill in some of the blanks on this, about how there is no conversation on this in Connecticut, or what conversation there is. If your proposal could kickstart a conversation, I think that would be great. However, though, earlier in the conversation, you put the question to Harold about, if there was a plebiscite,
right,
determining that human life begins at conception,
or asking the question.
Asking the question, is that something you would accept? And if I understand you correctly, Harold said, well, I would, but I'm not necessarily speaking for the Libertarian Party of Connecticut in that. So I guess my question is, what would be the practical effects of that? If that plebiscite decided that majority says yes, that human life begins at conception, and that leads to laws that protect the life of the unborn. Is that something you would support, Harold? Because I think that's where you're going, right?
Actually, I have 2 steps of mine, and I wasn't specific there. Number 1, a non-binding plebiscite to see what the sense of the people is, where you actually get the conversation and debate happening. And number 2, if you could ever persuade the states to consider a constitutional amendment, absolutely yes. And when you do, I have language for that, which is different than the pro-life movement has.
So another approach, I think most of the, last 3 or 4 Congresses, there's been the Life Begins at Conception Act. It hasn't, gotten any traction.
And it won't.
I know Rand Paul is one of the sponsors, but it would have had the 5th and 14th Amendment, I think, define, apply to the unborn.
See, so the problem I have with that concept is that you're going to. I'm old enough that I remember back when women used to go get abortions with coat hangers, and that really happened. Okay, that's not just something that people say to gain sympathy. So in order to prevent that type of thing happening, you need to make sure that the women involved have a buy-in. That the child is born, the child is
have a buy-in.
Yep. The child is alive, and that they need to be committed to bringing it to term. And then even if they don't want to be saddled with it, there's other options of abortion. From abortion, there's adoption and those kind of things. But she has to buy into it. If you force her to not to have an abortion, that's like forcing people not to use drugs or anything else. You're forcing them to do something that they can do under the table, underground. And that's what you do. Is you drive it underground. You don't keep it up where people can talk about it and convince her that there's a better way.
In terms of drug policy, I'm almost probably totally on the same page as you are. Okay. The problem is this a human life? Number 1, and number 2. If you look at all the data on why women get abortions, it's overwhelmingly because the man will not be responsible to her.
Yep.
And therefore, to me, I think one step that could be done in the meantime is make all men responsible for the well-being of their conceived children.
I would go along with that.
And talk about being incremental.
Yeah.
But the kickback to that would be huge if you try to do that. But that satisfies that. There's another thing that needs to be said, because I've been in the debate with people who, in the 1950s, are the coat hanger abortions. There is great exaggeration on that, though there's some reality to it. Yep. And Peter, you probably know this better than I do. All the abortion doctors, quote unquote, in this country today are the absolute lowest esteemed within the medical community. And when you look at the language of Roe v. Wade, it's not between a woman and her physician.
Yep.
The physician's never the one doing it, a personal physician. But you know, you're raising such good questions, and these questions need to be expressed. But can they be expressed in such a way where people are free to know they can disagree?
Yep.
But I also believe when you go to the buy-in, the libertarian ethos, I'm all on the same page with you. Women are more pro-life than our men.
Yes.
You know, but we have to, from my perspective, empower them.
Yeah.
And when you get to that legal point, and then if we get to the legal protection of women and their unborn, there's no penalties against the woman in my mind. The penalties against the men.
As there was not before Roe versus Wade.
Only one attempted legal case in U.S. history which failed. Yeah.
Because, well, see, I think that the man has a responsibility in the whole thing, and that is also what we're talking about in the Libertarian Party, is that you have to have responsive consequences. You're responsible for the consequences of your actions. Okay, so if in that case, the man has to be responsible for his actions.
Yes.
And my growing up, I always took that position. You know, if I ever got anybody pregnant, I was going to have to marry him. That was the social. You know, I'm 72 years old. In case people don't understand this, so back in that time frame, that was what happened. They call them shotgun weddings or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
But if you got somebody, if somebody got pregnant, then you had responsibility to marry him. And I didn't want to have that responsibility, so that held me back. And nowadays there doesn't seem to be any problems
Reality
anymore.
gave you a boundary.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
And
You know, Harold, you mentioned earlier about when I talked about private action. I wanted to briefly give another context when I was addressing Yale Divinity School in 1996 or 7. And it was the debate where the question was, is homosexuality part of the image of God, something like that. And it was a standing room only type of event that was there. And no one was willing to do a forum with me to represent the other side. And so at one point, I said that my pro-life libertarian ethos equals this: whatever you do in private in terms of your sexual intimacy is your freedom. Okay, so long as you don't injure life, liberty, property of others. And we weren't talking about abortion there. We could be talking about other ways in which actions can hurt people.
Yep.
And I had a number of avowedly homosexual students come up and say, "Really, you really believe that?" I said, "Yes, I do believe that." Okay, and so that's another case of my pro-life libertarian ethos, because there are a lot of other damages and injuries that can happen in a context like that, but also heterosexually as well.
Yes.
And so unless we can take one ethos and apply it universally, then I don't think we can't be consistent. And to me, the ethos that I have is that one man, one woman, one lifetime is good. Once you move outside of that, you start to break trust and problems begin to happen. Yeah. And so the question is, how do you bring that into law? So for example, even when we get to the part about where I talk about marriage here, it's all based on the need to persuade and how the law can serve that.
well, because when you're talking about it, it's not just getting the woman pregnant, but it's also spread of disease and all that kind of stuff as well. Because,
absolutely.
And there's a consequence to all that you have to take responsibility for.
On the question of marriage and being persuasive, it's worth noting for the historical record, because no one else will note it unless we do, that we beat same-sex marriage every year at the state legislature for a decade. That it only came about here in Connecticut by the diktat of our state Supreme Court. And then almost a decade later, that's what happened on the federal level as well.
Right.
You got a Roe v. Wade for same-sex marriage. So
And that's what happened in Massachusetts first.
Yep.
They actually imported a judge.
So sometimes you actually do persuade. You do all the stuff that you're encouraging, John. You actually succeed in persuading and going through the democratic process. And it's like Lucy pulling the football out from under Charlie Brown. They just change the rules on you anyway.
Boy, do you know that metaphor applies to more reality in life?
It's really something. How often it comes up.
I'll tell you, Charles Schultz hit genius with that
He
one.
really was.
Along with the sort of Damocles over Snoopy's Sopwith Camel when it was in park mode. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just read Snoopy or Peanuts. But I want to come back before we finish this discussion, Mark, to what you said about incrementalization and so forth. But also back to what you just brought up. This is why I am proposing to go for the whole wad, which is rewrite the state constitution and laws, because I think we're on a death spiral right now. And I think you have to do that all the way through in order to redress, for example, what you just said. You won at the persuasive level, and they came in with judicial fiat.
But can I jump in, because I know you want to go to Mark?
Oh, no, that's fine.
So, Mark's thing, he got the first question and he went right to the practicality. I mean, what is the practicality? And you actually have an answer here towards the end, which I think goes to what you just said. The means to accomplish such a rewrite is via a constitutional convention. This goes to what you say about how corrupt we are, how we're spiraling down, why something this massive an overhaul is necessary. And your answer to Mark's, the first thing Mark said is at the end here, a constitutional convention, just by way of a little history. So right now we are under a constitution in Connecticut, as you know, that only goes back to the 1960s. And there's a provision in our current constitution that a question must appear on the ballot every 20 years.
And they shot it down recently.
Right, but I mean, it's the history behind that you have to understand.
Yeah.
The question has to appear on the ballot every 20 years, asking the voters, do you want to hold a constitutional convention? That question was first put up in 1966. So, 66. And then, no, it was 1986. And so it was supposed to be on the ballot again in 2006. And Susan Bisowitz, who is now
that long ago now?
What's that?
That long ago?
Susan Bisowitz. So after it appeared in 1986, the next time it should have appeared on the ballot was 2006. Susan Bisowitz, who is now our lieutenant governor-elect, at the time was the Secretary of State, basically illegally, unconstitutionally reinterpreted that provision in the Constitution to move it 2 years later to 2008, because there's this the traditional understanding of politics in Connecticut is that non-presidential years are better for conservatives in Connecticut than presidential years. That the Democrats all come out and vote because of the top of the ticket in presidential years. So that question was supposed to be on the ballot in 2006. She moved it to 2008. Then the unions all jumped in and spent about $1 million. Those of us who wanted a yes vote so that we could do stuff like this, we had about $10,000 versus $1 million. And they blanketed the airwaves. And this, same-sex marriage was certainly in the backdrop here. What happened was Senator Blumenthal, who at the time was our Attorney General and was responsible for defending our marriage laws in court when the same-sex marriage ruling was going, never even defended the law himself, sent his staff to do it, and refused to make the only laws, as was said in the dissent by Justice Zarella in the Kerrigan ruling, refused to make the only argument that has ever won in cases of this kind, which is what are the purposes of marriage, how does it affect society. Their only argument was we don't need same-sex marriage because we already have civil unions. They lost on that. Senator Blumenthal then, Attorney General at the time, then supported a no vote on the Constitutional Convention. It's like you have a lawyer representing you, you lose your case, and then he joins your opponents in opposing your right to appeal.
So if I could just interject here. So those of us at the table can follow that. A lot of viewers may not follow all the weeds, okay? So which is fine, because we want to be educational everything we do, okay? And you know this territory, you've been in the thick of it. And so basically what you're saying is...
just to wrap up, is they spent $1 million. They put out ads with these guys and cigars behind closed doors saying, oh, these big moneyed interests, when they were the big moneyed interests, will control the state of Connecticut if there's a yes vote for a constitutional convention. And the people bought that. And, at one point, the polls showed something like 60-70% of the public supported a yes vote. They turned that around with the money. We got the no vote.
Right.
And so we've been down this road before.
Right, exactly. So that's what I mean by structurally corrupt in terms of our political process. And it comes back to Mark's point about how do you make a difference, what is possible, what is doable. And so, for example, I think the only thing that is doable needs a big issue and a big goal. That doesn't mean you can get it in one fell swoop. So that's my personal predilection on that perspective. Also, if we are not going to succeed unless we truly mobilize a consent of the governed grassroots, okay?
Correct.
And get people in office. That's what my goal is, okay?
Yep.
And so step one right here is the conversation. And what's crucial about the conversation, Francis Schaeffer's language 50 years ago of co-belligerence. Now, I don't like that language, co-belligerent, to people who are against something. But what he's talking about there is people who may have the same positive goal, but from different perspectives where they have other disagreements. What is the ability to actually be proactive at places where we agree? And I think the only way you can maximize that possibility is getting everyone at the table who wants to be at the table and honing that language where no one has to compromise when you come up with something. If you do, you come up with something that is good, that I think is the only potency in the face of a deeply corrupt state. And so when I advertise that I think that this proposal could cut state law by 99% and the size of government and taxes by 50%, and if you could get that emotional reality inside the inner cities, we could govern this state by the true consent of the governed. That's actually what my goal is, because there's a lot of people who are slaves to a controlling state.
I'm curious to hear Mark's opinion on what you just said, because Mark, to me, as another guy yourself involved in practical politics, and I'm completely on board with everything John just said, but I hear echoes of the just failed Bob Stefanowski campaign for governor. It's more about we're gonna cut taxes, people are gonna love this, I'm gonna run on this and nothing else, and boom.
That's a good question.
So, my group is this year going to propose a platform to the state party, so they actually stand for something. And we're trying to not be the enemy of the state party. Right now we've maintained good relations with them. Where I came from, Massachusetts, the relationships were terrible. Republican Assembly almost took over the state party, and then they spent millions of dollars to defeat them in the next round. They had 38 out of 80 seats, members of the Republican Assembly. Now I think they have 1. So, as far as the practical, and you mentioned the cities too. I don't think anyone has cracked the code on moving the vote in the cities. I think it's potentially the African American clergy is a key, and finding pro-life Hispanics in the city to really turn things. And I don't think there's been any serious effort.
Yeah.
So,
and also for white suburban pro-lifers, that can be sometimes a single issue. It's not a single issue for the inner city Black and Hispanic pastors, even though they abide by it completely. There's far deeper issues dealing with economics and issues of racial justice that the Republican Party does not address, period, and the Democratic Party gives a sop, in my estimation. Mm-hmm. They touch the emotions, but they don't give anything solid, okay? So, for example, if you watch President Trump right now talk about the lowest African-American employment in U.S. history, and his policies and his regulation or deregulation work has helped that way, but there's no emotional connection, okay? And so unless the emotional connection is an honest one and a deep one, it's not going to succeed. Back to Stefanowski, okay? And this would be one partial critique I would give of libertarianism is it speaks only of economics and doesn't have an emotional touch point.
Man does not live by bread alone.
or by statistics alone, yes.
Or tax cuts alone.
Right. So what happens is Stefanowski, he went straight on he was a one-string banjo.
Yep.
And so the economics, the freedom and whatnot.
The only thing I might correct is that the Libertarian Party is not just pure economics, but my belief structure is that if you fix the economic problem, a lot of these other problems will be minuscule.
And I think from an opposite angle.
Yep.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And here's the angle. Do you know what the etymology of the word economics is?
Probably.
Word history.
You'll have to remind me.
In the Hebrew Bible, bayit is the word for household.
Yeah.
In the Septuagint, the Greek translation, it comes into oikos and oikonomos. Oikos for household and oikonomos for the rule of the household. Oikonomos, our English word for economics. In all of human history, wherever a man is faithful to a woman in marriage, singularly, is the strongest economic unit there is.
Yes,
okay?
That's the base unit.
Yes. Therefore, we come back, Peter and I do, and Mark, come back to the pro-life ethos. And if you have anything, so for example, let's go back to LBJ and the Great Society. And Daniel Patrick Moynihan was with him, and then he rebelled against him 3 years later. Why? by giving the money to single women, black women in communities, you went from a marriage rate in the black community, an illegitimacy rate that went from 15% up to now about 74%. In fact, in 1941, the beginning of World War II in terms of our involvement, the illegitimacy rate among black Americans was lower than among white Americans, which astounds me. Thomas Sowell argues this. Astounds me when you think of 400 years of chattel slavery, Jim Crow laws, the breaking up of the family, and then now you bring in the government to make marriage without meaning. So that's why I think you've got to address the marriage, and that marriage is, and you would not be able to do that without a full pro-life conviction, the way I've articulated it. Peter, your thoughts?
I'm in complete agreement with everything you just said.
Well, I have I agree with the fact that the government undermined the social structure, fabric of the country with that type of situation. But it's not, I don't think it's important that we have family values, and they were under attack. But at the same time, I still go back to the fact that people have to have the buy-in, and the individuals have to support it themselves, because what the government did wrong was that they made it economically feasible to split up. It was actually economically preferred to be apart, because the aid was to dependent children that were to women with dependent children, and if there was a husband involved, then you didn't get the money.
Right.
And
he would earn less at minimum wage than she would receive from the government.
Right. And so it was feasible for them to lie about being together. And what became a lie eventually became reality.
Right.
And so that was where the government messed up. And that's actually telling you why libertarians believe the way they believe, because the government makes things worse, they don't make things better.
We're on the same page on that. So let me come back to this. And are to be protected by due process of law for the entire natural duration of their lives. Can you agree with that language, knowing it would produce a debate?
Yeah, I can agree with the language. The only issue I had with that statement was in the beginning, you're setting aside the people that are atheists and agnostics.
Oh, actually, thank you for bringing that up, okay? Those are the only people who object, okay?
Yeah.
And I've debated 17 of the top atheists in the country, okay?
Yeah.
Always good conversations. And you know what my rejoinder is? No. What's so powerful about a Protestant hegemony that founded this country, 55 out of 56 of the signatories, did not impose their Protestantism. They gave full religious liberty, including to Muslims, infidels, and atheists.
Yep.
They had the
First
full
Amendment.
Exactly, the First Amendment.
Yep.
But what
The federal government. Here in Connecticut, the Congregationalists were the state church till like 1818.
Or 1821. But yes, Connecticut, Massachusetts were the holdouts, Virginia before that. Right, at the federal level, and it should be disestablished, period. I'm glad for that. But here's the thing, is that what you had, or here's my argument is, where in human history can you show me unalienable rights for all people equally, apart from the God of Genesis 1 and 2? And you can't. So what I say to my atheist friends is, look, you need to understand the nature of this. This is history. In fact, when I rewrote this Connecticut thing, I used reference to God half as often as the original one did, the 1964 one, okay? And I use image of God, okay, at this one point. So you could say humanity, but no, I think it has to be linked there. Then you could ask for the history of atheism. Where do they have unalienable rights in their source material? They don't.
Oh, yeah.
Where do they allow dissent? So the key thing to me is allowing dissent. And so what I'd like to do as we conclude the show, I just want to read through and then get your comments. The 6 assumptions. But actually, no, I'll just speak them real briefly. The 6 assumptions of what I call the 6 pillars of biblical power, which equals the 6 pillars of honest politics. And if, to the extent that we can agree on these, we can have real debate, and I think practically move forward. First is the power to give, and that is the unalienable rights given by the Creator are for all of us, our life, liberty, and property. And honest government is for those who honor those gifts to all people equally. Secondly, the power to live in the light. This is transparency. All public decisions are made publicly. No backroom deals whatsoever. In fact, when you read through this printout I gave to you, which is at thebibleandpolitics.org, you'll see 30 initiatives I have where it simply is making everything transparent to be seen. Thirdly is the power of informed choice, which means we define terms honestly. Unless terms are defined honestly, then we can't have informed choice. 4, the power to love hard questions. Every question is on the table from every angle in public dialogue. Number 5 is the power to love enemies. Now, I don't use that in my political language, but that's the theological language. A human being has no enemies. A Christian or a Jew has no enemies who's a human being, okay? Only the devil and the demons are our enemies. Therefore, we are to respect and listen well to those who literally want to kill us. When you come right down to it. This is the gospel, this is healthy politics. And finally, is the power to forgive or reconciliation. And gracious, we still need it today hugely when it comes to Native Americans and Black America. And so what I seek to do is I seek to put forth these biblical terms in political language, and to the extent that we can join a conversation, we can move forward. And so back to your question, Mark, that started the show when I brought you in about, well, John, you're the practical, I'm the idealist. I'm aiming for a marriage.
Okay, so
and so that means the whole process. Go ahead.
your third one about the level playing field for all ideas to be heard equally, I think is the key to change. I followed Peter since I moved to Connecticut in 2014, you know, when you lobby during the legislative session, and I think you have a very high success rate because your voice is heard. And I just recalled an incident that was very formative for me when I was in my junior year of college at a secular university, but it was Government 101. I transferred, I had to retake it. And we had a debate on abortion, and the teacher raised hands, you know, who's pro-life, who's pro-choice. And it was about 30 in the class, and only 4 were pro-life. And I remember 12 were, I'll call it pro-choice, 14 undecided. So we were given a week to prepare a debate, our 4 plus they could pick 4. And then the 14 undecided, you know, we'd all get out of the room, the ones who debated, and they would vote, and we won. Mm-hmm. And that was because we had the equal playing field. And we even pulled in the Nazi, you know, comparisons and the inhumanity, and, you know, we used very strong language. And that gave me strong hope that if Roe versus Wade is overturned and the debate goes back to the states, that if we are ready to debate, you know, we could win on abortion and marriage. And the marriage decision, I think, was 5-4 also. Yeah. So that could be overturned also. So I am very hopeful. And, you know, And
you know, I saw Justice Kennedy being interviewed recently on that decision. And personally, I was appalled at his answer. He said, well, what can we do now that there's 100,000 children of same-sex couples? You know, it's the cart before the horse. In other words, if you're a lawyer, you're going to argue first principles on forward. But that's an aside. That's free of charge. But let me come back to you, Mark. You know, I agree. What I've done for nearly 40 years, and I've been on 200 college campuses, all the Ivy Leagues and well beyond, I go out of my way to give hospitality to those who disagree with me. Now, more often than not, they don't want it, okay? It's very hard to get people. And the ones you get are the more thoughtful ones, and that's wonderful. But there are always the instinctive people in politics who simply don't confuse me with the facts. I don't want to hear a different opinion. And so we have to win the hearts and minds of the whole culture equally. So yes, we need to model the level playing field. So now I'm going to throw a question to you because I most think about it. What do you think structurally, strategically, is a way in which to increase its visibility and its potential fruitfulness?
What do you mean, the level playing field? Or?
Yes. How do you, Mark Anderson, chairman of the Connecticut Republican Assembly, how do you advance the level playing field?
I think that's hard. I didn't have an answer ready, but first you've got to show up and open your mouth. And then you've got to organize.
I'm going to stop you there, okay? What about most people who don't want to show up and open up their mouths because people are going to oppose them?
You've got to accept that some will help you behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, since I relocated to Connecticut, I've been trying to find like-minded people.
Okay.
First on Facebook, and then go to events, meet them in person, and then try to organize. And I think the open battles are the legislative session, upcoming one, January to June, and then preparing for the next election. That's where we saw how long in, Great Britain and the United States it took to get rid of slavery. So we got to really be in a long game and win hearts and minds one at a time. And the people in the front lines, are like Peter with his organization, and people who run for office. I think running for office, you're big on that.
Because that's what worked.
It gives
in the British Empire.
it gives you a platform. But I also think practically you got to have an intention and a plan to win, even if the odds are 1%. You got to be in it to win, and at the same time you're building for the future. So
One thing I'd add to it is that I think that there's a phrase called "teach the teachers."
Yes.
That in manufacturing and things like that, when I used to work there, we used to teach the teachers. So you teach the shop people to teach other people. And in the case of politics, you got to teach the news media. If you could get more and more of the news media to understand rather than just pick up what other people have told them and parrot it. If they really understood what they were saying and we educated them, then they would be the foothold to educate the public.
Now for my question for you, because that's a darn good idea to put on the table, is since most of the media come from Columbia School of Journalism or other like-minded places, I almost went to journalism school and then thought better of it back in the 70s. But they're being taught, and you have a whole cadre of taught people.
Yep.
How do you cut that Gordian knot?
Well, my perception, I didn't go to journalism school, but my perception is that the school is not.
These engineers don't do journalism.
Yeah, well, we do a lot of things. In order to graduate as an engineer, I had to take a lot of these other courses that are sideline things, like history and so. But but in a lot of these schools, they're not. There are professors that are pushing their agenda.
Right.
That's not what they're supposed to be teaching, because even in my engineering degree, in one of my history classes, it was an election year and I was of age to vote, and the professor is trying to talk us all into voting for his side. And I thought that, as a student, I thought that was totally inappropriate. And so if we can teach the parents and the students in return that it's not appropriate to have propaganda at the university, they're supposed to be educating you and giving you options, not guiding you in your future belief structure.
Right. Well, we have 1 minute left on the show, so I'll wrap it up. Did you have 20 seconds of something to say, Peter?
No, I think it's been a great conversation, and I'm grateful to be on here with you good people.
Well, I'm delighted, very much so. I've learned a lot, and I love the spontaneous answers to questions not anticipated, and also for myself. And Harold, you bless us with a final question about teaching the media, okay? Yeah. Because I've never put that clause together in my own brain. And Mark knows that I'm a tunnel view optimist, and I find that to be the most optimistic possibility I've ever thought of taking the present media and teaching them. I start ethically at how do we present ourselves in such a way that we are interesting and people of integrity in whom the media would have interest. And that's probably where my starting point would be. Well, 8 seconds to go. Thank you so much for joining us in this edition of thebibleandpolitics.org, thebibleandpolitics.org. This is your host, John Rankin. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.